so we're back to Thomas Taylor on Aristotle's philosophy. I got cut off abruptly the last time we did this, and then last week we canceled the session. So hopefully we can get back into the swing of things easily. We were talking about why water replaces land and land water. We were just in this footnote. So here's some Olympiodorus comments on the things just said. The thing now proposed by Aristotle, says Olympiodorus, is to show that the parts of the earth change according to dryness and moisture, from being moist becoming more dry, and from being dry becoming moist. But moisture being triple, viz. Either potable, or salt, or marshy, he shows that all moisture changes into dryness, for that earth changes from potable moisture into dryness, and from dryness into potable moisture, is evident from the disappearing and appearing of rivers. For places which were formerly aqueous have now become dry, and those which were formerly dry now abound with moisture. And this happens indeed with respect to potable moisture. It also happens with respect to salt or marine moisture, and that this is true is evident from the continent becoming sea and the sea becoming continent. This, however, Olympiodorus adds, happens in consequence of what is called the Great Winter and the Great Summer. But the Great Winter is when all the planets become situated in a wintry sign, viz. Either in Aquarius or in Pisces, and the Great Summer is when all of them are situated in a summer sign, viz. Either in Leo or Cancer. For as the sun alone, when he is in Leo, causes summer, but when he is in Capricorn, winter, and thus the year is formed, which is so denominated because the sun tends to one and the same point, en niaulos, for his restitution is from the same to the same. In like manner, there is an arrangement of all the planets affected in long periods of time, which produces the great year. For if all the planets, so this is of course different from Plato's great year, which has to do with the precession of the equinox, which is determined by Earth's obliquity in its rotations, whereas this is the cycle of the planets, so this is a different great year. For if all the planets becoming vertical heat in the same manner as the sun, but departing from this vertical position refrigerate, it is not unreasonable to suppose that when they become vertical, they produce a great summer, but when they have departed from this position, a great winter. In this great winter, therefore, the continent becomes sea, but in the great summer, the contrary happens in consequence of the burning heat and there being great dryness when there was moisture. Aristotle also assigns another cause of the sea becoming continent and the continent sea. For rivers, in running into the sea by the mud which they bring with them, form shores, and thus that place becomes land. But when they do not run into the sea, they cause the land to become sea. Except that rivers, both when they run and when they do not run into the sea, produce each of these changes, yet not after the same manner. For if a river should happen to run into the sea about the southern part, the sea becomes continent. Okay. In this case, however, it is necessary that the sea should be impelled to the opposite continent, and that continent becomes sea. And this happens indeed if a river runs into the sea. But if it does not, the water again returns to its proper place, and thus that which was formerly sea becomes continent, and that which was formerly continent becomes sea. Okay, so when a river empties into the Mediterranean, on the other side of the Mediterranean, there's going to be, it's like a conservation of the amount of water total, or the total amount of dry and wet area, or something like that. That the sea, however, becomes continent, and the continent sea, Aristotle evinces from Egypt, for formerly it was sea, and the Nile always bringing with it fresh mud, whence also it was called Nile, which became accumulated in the oblique parts of the river and the sea, from the addition which by this means was gradually made, the sea at length became a continent. Oh yeah, the last thought was that the river brings mud with it that gradually builds up to form land, and then there'll be a loss of land, presumably on the other side of the sea. Hence, Herodotus calls Egypt the gift of the Nile, but Aristotle calls it the work of the Nile. And Aristotle denominates it better than Herodotus because he calls it by an agricultural name, for the Nile, as it were, cultivates Egypt. Not indeed that Herodotus uses an inappropriate name, for the Egyptians possess the formation of their land as the gift of the Nile. But that Egypt was formed from the mud accumulated by the Nile, Aristotle shows from 3 arguments. First, that all the mouths through which the Nile exonerates itself into the sea, except the canopic or canopic, were made by the hand, viz., by human art, and not by the river. Hence, it is a sign that these mouths were opened by men, and that they excavated the channels of the river in order that the Nile, thus flowing more easily into the sea, a great part of the region which was occupied by that river and was marshy, might be dried and rendered habitable. But that the canopic mouth, says Olympiodorus, is not the work of the hand is evident, since Menelaus, in the course of his voyage, sailed into it, whence also it was called canopic, from Canopus, the pilot of Menelaus. The second argument is that Egypt was anciently called Thebes, and this is an indication that formerly the upper part of Egypt, in which Thebes is situated, was alone inhabited, but that the upper part was added by the Nile, and gradually began to be dried and inhabited. Okay. So the first argument, that some of the mouths were opened by hand, just is consistent with this gradual process of muddy material being added, and people opened up channels to let the water out, retaining the mud, creating dry land out of it. And then the ancient name Thebes suggests that Egypt, the upper part of Egypt, used to be all there was. That one's not super strong, of course. The third argument is from Homer, who so speaks of the Memphitic region as if it did not then exist, or at least as if the whole of it did not exist. This also, of course, is a bad argument, although I'd be interested in seeing the quote from Homer where they derive that. Of course, Memphis is much older than Homer. This, therefore, is a sign that all that part of Egypt which is extended from Memphis as far as to the sea was made after the time of Homer by the inundation of the Nile. Makes you wonder when they thought exactly Homer lived. But it reasonably happens that places nearer to the sea, as being lower, are more slowly left by the sea, and afterwards for some time remain marshy, till, being gradually dried, they become habitable. It is also well observed by Olympiodorus that the reason why acme and old age do not happen to the bodies of plants and animals according to a part, but the whole at once suffers these changes, while this happens to the earth according to a part, on account of heat and cold, is in order that between things perfectly perpetual and things perfectly corruptible, there may be a certain medium, which is neither corruptible according to the whole, nor incorruptible according to the whole. Acme and decay, however, do not simply follow from cold and heat, but also from dryness and moisture. Right. So that's, of course, a Neoplatonic argument. Aristotle doesn't give that. That's just Olympiodorus. Whenever you have two extremes, the formula is basically like if there's something with property AA and something with property BB, then there's going to be something with property AB that joins them. So we have things that are corruptible according to a whole and according to a part. We have things that are incorruptible according to whole or part. So in between those, we're going to have something that's corruptible in part, but not in whole. Okay. And when those things are part of the same spectrum, of course, that does make sense. So when you have contrary qualities, where it's like AABB, and they are true contraries, then you should actually expect a middle term that's AB. Okay, so moving on with Aristotle. Those, therefore, who look to that which is small fancy that the cause of such like mutations is the change of the universe, as if the heaven were generated. Hence, they say, the sea becomes less as being dried, because now more places are seen to be thus affected than formerly. This, however, is partly true and partly not true, for there are many places which were formerly covered with water, but are now land. The contrary, however, is also true. For if they had directed their attention to many places, they would have found that the sea has occupied the land. It is not, however, requisite to fancy that the generation of the world is the cause of this, for it is ridiculous to move the universe on account of small and momentary mutations. So some people think that like new land, I guess, was always being created. Um, and that's consistent with creation myths generally, which often held that there was some primordial water that the land came from. And so when you see new areas of land emerge, oh, well, this is just part of that same process of creation. The world's getting bigger. Aristotle says, no, you're just looking at, so to speak, a rising tide or a falling tide. But the bulk and magnitude of the earth are nothing compared with the universe. We should conceive, however, that the cause of all these things is this, that as winter is produced in the seasons of the year, so in destined times, in a certain great period, there is a great winter and an excess of rain. This, however, does not always happen in the same regions, but takes place just as that did which is called the deluge of Deucalion. Footnote 5. In the introduction to my translation of the Physics of Aristotle, I was mistaken in supposing that Simplicius, in speaking of the deluge, meant the Ogygian deluge, for I am now persuaded he meant that of Deucalion. Now, I've never heard of the Ogygian deluge. Ogygian deluge. I thought there was just the deluge of Deucalion, who's a mythological character. So Ogyges is a primeval mythological ruler in ancient Greece, generally of Boeotia, but an alternative tradition makes him the first king of Attica. Okay, so there's all sorts of stuff. The deluge of Ogyges, the first worldwide flood in Greek mythology, the Ogygian deluge, occurred during his reign and derives its name from him, though some sources regard it as a local flood, such as the inundation of the Lake Copius, a large lake once in the center of Boeotia. Okay, so it seems, just skipping ahead in this Wikipedia article, it seems the deluge of Deucalion of Greek mythology is the Greek version of the older legend. Deucalion and Pyrrha were the only survivors of that great deluge. Their son Hellen was the patriarch of the Hellenes. Okay, so I guess the Ogygian deluge is the older story. So we could look into that. And it's alternatively either treated as a universal flood or a local flood. All right. So back to Aristotle. This, however, does not always happen in the same regions, but takes place just as that did, which is called the deluge of Deucalion, for this happened principally about Greece, and especially ancient Greece, and this about Dodona and Achelous. Okay, so also the flood of Deucalion seems to have been, at least according to Aristotle, a local thing. For this river has in many places changed its stream. For the Selli dwelt there, and those who were then called Greeks, but now Hellenes. Okay, so this is interesting. Graikoi as Greeks. So this word, says Limpiodorus, the Romans mark with an acute accent in the penultimate syllable, calling it graikos. He adds, but universally the Romans mark every noun in this way, in consequence of their arrogance and ostentation, whence they are called by the poets beyond measure proud. Okay, so for some reason, putting the accent on the penultimate symbol was ostentatious on the part of the Romans. Not sure why that's relevant. Um, and we also don't have information here on why they were formerly termed the Graikoi, but now Hellenes. But if we recall that Helen was the son of Deucalion and this other survivor, then it makes sense that the post Deucalion Greeks are the Hellenes. Prior to that, they were still Graikoi. Um, okay, so interesting. When, therefore, there is such an excess of rain, it is requisite to think that it is sufficient for a long time. And as now some say that the cause why certain rivers are perennial and others not is the magnitude of chasms under the earth, so we say that this arises from the magnitude of elevated places and their density and cold, for these receive, cover, and produce a great quantity of water. But when the mountains suspended over rivers are small or fungous, stony, and argillaceous, I am going to look up that term. Argillaceous. Consisting of or containing clay, argillaceous. Also fungus, I'm not sure exactly. Resembling, caused by, or having the nature of a fungus. So that's the adjectival form of the term fungus, just with an O. All right, so, but when the mountains suspended over rivers are small or fungus, stony, and argillaceous, then it is necessary to think that those rivers previously fail in which there is such a motion of humidity that they are more able to render the humidity of places perennial. These, however, in the course of time appear to become more dry, but the others, which are aqueous, become less dry till the same period again accedes. But since it is necessary that there should be, so although there's a great winter and a great summer and preponderating dryness, preponderating wetness, still local conditions lead to like the opposite motions occurring at the same time. So there's a local variation even then. But since it is necessary that there should be a certain mutation of the whole, though not a generation and corruption of it, since the universe remains, it is also necessary, as we say, that the same places should not always be wet from the sea and rivers, and dry from the absence of these. That also which has happened evinces the truth of this, for the whole region of the Egyptians, whom we assert to be the most ancient of men, appears to have been made, and to be the work of the river Nile, as is evident to those who survey that country. This also is sufficiently indicated by places about the Red Sea, for one of the ancient kings endeavored to dig through this, since if the whole place were made navigable, it would procure them no small advantages. Yeah, and that's a true thing from Egyptian. I forget who it was. Well, he's about to say Sesostris, probably the Greek name for him, but they did try to like dig the equivalent of the Swiss Canal in antiquity. So Sesostris is said to have been the first of the ancient kings who attempted this, but he found the sea to be higher than the earth. Hence, he first, and Darius afterwards, desisted from digging, in order that the stream of the river might not be corrupted by being mingled with the sea. It is evident, therefore, that all these were one continued sea. Hence the parts about Libya, the Ammonian region, are seen to be more low and hollow than the nature of a place remote from the sea requires. For it is evident that from mud being collected, pools and dry land are formed, and the stagnant water, which is there left, becoming in the course of time dry, entirely disappears. The bottom also of the lake Maeotis has become so much increased by the inundation of rivers that ships of merchandise are of a much less magnitude sail in it now than 60 years ago. Okay, so just more evidence of land accumulating or water gradually disappearing in a place. Hence, it is easy to infer from this that as from the firstmost lakes, so that of Maeotis is formed by rivers, and that at length the whole of it will necessarily become dry. Farther still, the Bosphorus always flows indeed in consequence of being inundated, and it may yet be seen after what manner this happens. For when the river had made a shore from Asia, that which was behind was made a lake, which was small at first, and afterwards became dry. Okay, this is kind of significant. I want to be clear on what he's saying, because of course there was a point in time when the Bosphorus was opened and the Black Sea was formerly a lake, but I don't think he's talking about that. It'd be interesting, of course, if somehow Aristotle knew about that, which was like 5,500 BC. Okay, farther still, the Bosphorus always flows indeed in consequence of being inundated, and it may yet be seen after what manner this happens. Okay, so the Bosphorus always flows, and the reason why. For when the river had made a shore from Asia, that which was behind was made a lake. The river had made a shore from Asia, okay, which was small at first and afterwards became dry. Afterwards, another shore was formed from this, and a lake from the shore, and this will happen, and this will always happen in a similar manner. So this process is not real clear to me what he's saying took place that causes the Bosphorus to always flow. But it seems like he's describing some mud deposit and then a lake forming and then the lake drying and then a mud deposit forming land and a lake forming and then lake drying. It's hard for me to visualize exactly what he's talking about. But okay. But this frequently taking place, it is necessary in the course of time that a river, as it were, should be formed, and that at length this should become dry. Okay, so I guess he's saying that the Bosphorus Canal was slowly formed by land, river, land, lake, uh, like carving the canal. I think it's really not clear. And then he's saying at length it should become dry because everything in the length of time will move to its opposite. It is evident, therefore, since time will never fail and the universe is perpetual, that neither the river Tanais nor the Nile has always flowed, but that the place whence they flow was once dry. For their work has an end, but time has not. It is fit also to assert this in a similar manner of other rivers. Since, however, rivers are generated and corrupted, and the same places of the earth are not always aqueous, it is also necessary that the sea should be similarly changed. But some parts of the sea always receding, and others always acceding, it is evident that the same parts of the earth are not always some of them sea and others continent, but all these are changed in time. And thus we have shown why the same parts of the earth are not always dry land, nor always navigable, and in a similar manner, why some rivers are perennial and others not. Okay, so the footnote 7 there. Aristotle, says Olympiodorus, having shown that the parts of the earth change according to dryness and moisture, and more according to the former than the latter, in consequence of his having lived after the deluge of Deucalion, now cuts off the suspicion of the multitude. For some one of these may think that since the earth is changed according to a part from a more moist to a more dry condition, all the earth will at length be changed and corrupted, and that on this account the whole world is corruptible. For in the first place, if certain parts of the earth become dry, others become aqueous. And the truth of this is testified by the great philosopher Ammonius, for he says that the land has become sea for 5 stadia about Heraclea and Canopus. Ammonius was a, Neoplatonic philosopher, teacher of Simplicius. I think Ammonius was the son of Hermias. Okay. For he says that the land has become sea for 5 stadia about Heraclea and Canopus, as is evident from habitations which still remain in the middle sea and which resemble islands. In the next place, it is not fit from what happens about the earth to infer that the like will also happen to the heavens, compared with which the earth may be said to be without magnitude, for it has the relation of a point to them. And why do I say compared with the heavens? For the sun himself, which appears to be but a foot in diameter, on account of his distance from the earth, is demonstrated to be 170 times larger than the earth. It is not proper, therefore, to infer from the earth that the world will be corrupted, but it is necessary to assign as the cause of the mutation of the earth, according to a part, from an aqueous to a more dry condition, the great winter, of which we have before spoken. For when this happens, a part of the earth being deluged, a change then takes place to a more dry condition, till the great summer succeeds, which, however, does not cause the corruption of all the earth, for neither was the deluge of Deucalion mundane, since this happened principally in Greece. All right, so I think we get the picture of how land and sea change and so forth. Moving on, chapter 11, book 2. That the sea is unbegotten and perpetual, and that it is the wholeness of water, is thus demonstrated by Aristotle in the second book of his treatise on meteors. Okay, so the sea is the wholeness of water, and that the sea as a whole is unbegotten and perpetual. Land and sea may change places, but the sea itself has always existed. So Aristotle. The ancients and those who employed themselves about theological concerns make fountains of the sea, in order that they may be the principles and roots of the earth and sea. For thus, perhaps, they apprehended that what is said would be more tragical and venerable, as if this were a certain great portion of the universe, and all the rest of the world subsisted about this place, and for the sake of this, as being most honorable and the principal. So they dramatized the role of the ocean, I guess he's saying. Aristotle, footnote 8 there, Aristotle says Olympiodorus properly uses the words more tragical. For Euripides says that the sun, and in like manner the heaven, were generated on account of the earth, conceiving the earth to be a great portion of the universe, contrary to astronomers who say that the earth has but the relation of a point to the whole heaven. Other theologists also speak in a similar manner, among whom is Hesiod, for they suppose the earth to be a great portion of the universe, on account of the lunar mountains, which they say nearly touch the lunar sphere. Okay, so he's not talking about the sea. He's saying they exaggerate the role of the earth. And sure, all right. But those who are more wise, according to human wisdom, assert that the sea is generated. So sort of the opposite opinion. Some people make the earth and sea too great a thing in the cosmic scheme. And then some people say that the sea is generated, which I guess is kind of the opposite. It's less venerable than we ought to treat it. So Aristotle here speaks about the natural philosophers who supposed the sea to be generated according to its saltness, but he properly says human wisdom, i.e. human science, or in other words, physiology. Aristotle. For they say that the whole place which is about the earth was at first moist, but being dried by the sun, one part converted into vapor produced blasts of wind. Okay. So the whole earth was moist, and then it was dried by the sun, one part being converted into vapor produced wind, and the revolutions of the sun and moon, and that the remaining part is the sea. Okay. Hence they fancy that the sea, by being dried by the sun, becomes less, and that at length the whole of it will become dry. But some of them say that the earth, being heated by the sun, sweat is, as it were, produced, and that on this account the sea is salt, for sweat is also salt. Others again say that the earth is the cause of the saltness of the sea, for as water, which is percolated through ashes, becomes salt, after the same manner also the sea is salt, from an earth of this kind being mingled with it. That it is impossible, however, there should be fountains of the sea, it is necessary to survey through things which actually exist. For of the waters which are about the earth, some are flowing, and others are stagnant. All flowing, therefore, are fontal waters. Concerning fountains, however, we have before observed that it is necessary to conceive a fountain as a principle, not from which, as a vessel, water is derived, but as that in which water, when generated and confluent, is always first collected. Okay. Water, when it's generated, comes out of fountains. It's not going to be just some store of water that emits that store. It has to be the first place the water is contained as the water is generated from other elements. But of stagnant waters, some are a collection of many kinds and subsiding, such as the waters of marshes and lakes, which differ in multitude and paucity. Other stagnant waters are fontal, and all these are produced by the hand. I mean, for instance, what are called well waters. Right. For it is necessary that the fountain of all these waters should be higher than their stream. Hence, some flow spontaneously, such as fontal and river waters, but others require the assistance of art. Such, therefore, and so many are the differences of waters. These things, however, being thus determined, it is impossible there should be fountains of the sea, since it is not possible that the sea can be in any one of these genera of waters. For it can neither be effluxive nor made by the hand, but all fontal waters are either one or the other of these. Yeah, okay. We do not, however, see that any quantity of fontal water so great as this becomes spontaneously stagnant. Farther still, since there are many seas which are not in any place mingled with each other, of which the Red Sea appears to communicate but in a small degree with the sea beyond the Pillars of Hercules, but the Hyrcanian and Caspian Sea are separated from the external sea and are surrounded with inhabitants. This being the case, the fountains could not be concealed if they existed in any of those habitable places. The sea, however, appears to flow in narrow places wherever, in consequence of the surrounding earth, it is collected into a small from a great deep, because it is frequently in equilibrium. But this, in a great extent of sea, is immanifest. If, however, in consequence of the narrowness of the earth, it obtains a small place, it is necessary that the small libration in the deep should there appear to be great. And I'm going to look up libration here real quick. In astronomy, an apparent or real oscillation of the moon, by which the parts near the edge of the disk that are often not visible from the earth sometimes come into view. Okay. Well, I'm not sure in this context of the waters what libration will mean then, but I think we can just keep going. But all the sea which is within the Pillars of Heracles flows according to the cavity of the earth and the multitude of rivers. For the lake Maeotis flows into the Euxine Sea, the Black Sea, and the Euxine into the Aegean Sea. All the seas, however, external to these, manifestly affect this in a less degree. But this happens to them both on account of the multitude of rivers, for more rivers flow into the Euxine Sea and the lake Maeotis than into the more ample region of the sea, and their deficiency in depth. For there the sea is always seen to be more deep, thus the Euxine Pontus is deeper than the lake Maeotis, the Aegean than the Euxine, and the Sicilian than the Aegean Sea. But the Sardonic and the Tyrrhenian seas are the deepest of all. Okay, so footnote 1 here. Aristotle here, says Olympiodorus, attacks the major proposition which affirms that everything which flows has fountains, since this is false. For the sea, says Aristotle, external to the pillars of Hercules, viz., the ocean, is stable, but the sea within the pillars, viz., the Caspian, is fluent, for it flows from more elevated land into cavities, viz., from the more northern into the more southern parts. All rivers also run into this as into a cavity, whence too, converting the influxions into land, they render the part of this sea towards the north more elevated, so that on this account it flows more to the southern parts. For many rivers indeed pour themselves into the lake Maeotis, whence also it is in parts converted into earth. The lake Maeotis again pours itself into the Euxine Sea, and this last flows into the Aegean Sea as being more hollow. And again, the Aegean flows into the Sicilian, and the Sicilian into the Sardonian and Tyrrhenian seas, which are more hollow than all of them. The sea, therefore, is fluent from position and not from fountains. Okay, so the sea flows because of these differences in elevation and depth. It may be inquired, however, how the more northern parts of the sea are more elevated in consequence of rivers pouring into it from thence, though the Nile, which is a great river, flows from the southern parts. To this, Olympiodorus replies that the Nile also flows from the northern parts, for it flows from the habitable part of the globe, which is in an opposite direction, which is false, but okay. There's some dubious geography going on here. We'll keep going with Aristotle. The sea, however, or the seas, which are beyond the pillars of Hercules, are not deep on account of the mud which they contain. Let's. Oh yeah, right. Like in the Timaeus, like immediately beyond the pillars, there's a shallow region, according to Plato, as he says in the Critias, or maybe in the Timaeus. So footnote 2, agreeably to what is here said by Aristotle, Plato also in the Timaeus says that the Atlantic Sea was in his time innavigable, arising from the gradually impeding mud, which the subsiding Atlantic island produced. Okay. Okay. So, and they are unruffled by the wind in consequence of the sea being in a hollow. As therefore rivers are seen to flow according to a part from lofty places, thus also from the more lofty places of the whole earth there is an abundant stream towards the north, and that these seas, on account of the effusion, are not deep, but the external seas have a greater profundity. That the parts of the earth, however, situated towards the north are elevated is indicated by this, that many of the ancient meteorologists were persuaded that the sun is not moved under the earth, but about the earth, and this place, and that he disappears and produces night because the earth is elevated towards the north. Such and so many things, therefore, have been said by us to show that it is not possible there can be fountains in the sea, and from what cause it thus appears to flow. Okay. The idea that there are higher regions to the north is also consistent with the belief in the what's the mountain range that the Hyperboreans live beyond. Um, I suppose it's not terribly important, but it was a common belief by geographers that there were these very high mountains far to the north. The cause, therefore, which induced our ancestors to suspect that the sea is the principle and body of all water is this. All right, it's actually going to bother me if I don't. Mountains, Hyperboreans.
It's the Rippian.
Riparian. Yeah,
Riparian.
there we go. Okay. All right. So the cause, therefore, which induced our ancestors to suspect that the sea is the principle and body of all water is this: that it seemed to be reasonable, as of the other elements there is a collected bulk, and a principle on account of multitude, from which a part, when divided, is changed and mingled with other things, as of fire, there is a collected bulk in the upper region, of air in the place after fire, and of earth there is a body about which all these are evidently situated. Okay, so footnote 3. By the principle and body of all water, and also by the expression collected body of water, Aristotle evidently means what Plato calls the whole or wholeness of water. So, yeah, the cause, I guess the view that the ancestors had this idea of the collected bulk of water implies that he endorses it. Um, Even Aristotle, when he says like the most ancient opinions, he's generally saying the true ones. Um, Iamblichus uses that as a trope very often, but Aristotle too, when he's saying like the ancient opinions, um, very often he is agreeing with them. He'll deviate from more recent, physical theories of Ionian philosophers, but the ancients are usually correct according to Aristotle. So, all right. And of earth there is a body about which all these are evidently situated. This being the case, it is manifest that we must necessarily investigate, for the same reason, a collected bulk about water. There appears, however, to be no other collected body of this kind, as there is of the other elements, except the magnitude of the sea. For that of rivers is neither collected nor stable, but is seen to be generated every day. From this doubt, therefore, the sea has been thought to be the principle of moisture and all water. Hence also some say that rivers rivers not only flow into this, but also from this. For according to them, the salt water, being percolated, becomes potable. But to this opinion another doubt is opposed, why this collected body of water is not potable, if it is the principle of all water, but is salt. The cause, however, of this doubt will at the same time be the solution of it, and it is necessary that the first opinion about the sea should be rightly assumed. For water, being extended about the earth in the same manner as the sphere of air is extended about water, and what is called fire about air, for this is the last of all, whether as most, or as we say, but the sun. Uh, Wait a second. Let me. In the same manner as the sphere of air is extended about water, and what is called fire about air, for this is the last of all, whether as most, or as we say. Um, so Aristotle, I think, is saying there's a fine distinction between his view about fire being the last of all and the majority, um, but in any case, fire is the highest. But the sun, revolving after this manner, and mutation, generation, and corruption, subsisting on this account, the most attenuated and sweet part of water, is elevated every day, and being separated from the whole, is evaporated into the upper region. But there being again condensed on account of cold, it again tends downward to the earth. And this is what nature always wishes to effect, as we have before observed. And Anaximander is the one who originated this scientific theory of basically the evaporation of water and the filling up of uh, rivers and so forth from the sea, as a principle. So he's agreeing with Anaximander here. Hence all those prior to us are ridiculous who apprehended that the sun is nourished by moisture, and some also say that on this account he revolves. For according to them, the same places are not always able to furnish him with nutriment, but it is necessary that he should either be nourished or corrupted. So some people apparently believed that the sun moves through the sky looking for nourishment from waters. So it's going around, the thirsty sun is looking for water. For visible fire lives as long as it has nutriment, but moisture is alone the nutriment of fire. As if the moisture which is elevated from the earth reached as far as to the sun, or as if its ascent was like that of flame. from which, assuming a similitude, they formed this opinion about the sun. There is not, however, this similitude, for flame, through continual moisture and dryness, which are changed, is generated and not nourished, for it does not, as I may say, remain for any time the same. It is impossible, however, that this should happen about the sun, since if it were nourished after the same manner, as they say, it is evident that there is not only a new sun every day, as Heraclitus asserts, but that there is always a new sun continually. Farther still, the elevation of moisture by the sun resembles water heated by fire. If therefore the fire under the water is not nourished by the water, neither is it fit to think that the sun is nourished by moisture, not even by his heat he should evaporate the whole of water. It is also absurd that they should alone pay attention to the sun, and overlook the safety of the other stars, though they are so numerous and of so great a magnitude. The same absurdity, however, happens to these and to those who say that the earth being at first moist, and the world about the earth being heated by the sun, the air was generated, and the whole heaven increased, and that this produced winds, and caused the revolutions of the celestial bodies. For we evidently see that water which is elevated always again descends, and though it is not annually restored, and in a similar manner in every region, yet all the assumed water is restored in certain orderly periods of time, so that neither are the bodies on high nourished, nor does one part of the air remain after its generation, and another part is generated, and again corrupted into water, but in a similar manner the whole is dissolved, and again condensed into water. The whole, therefore, of potable and sweet water is elevated on account of its levity, but salt water subsides on account of its gravity, as in its own proper place. Which is pretty much true, right? The the salt doesn't evaporate, so the sweet water, uh, due to levity, rises. For we must admit that this was appropriately doubted, since it would be absurd that water should not have a place as well as the other elements, and we must conceive this to be the solution of the doubt. But that place which we perceive to be occupied by the sea is not the place of the sea, but rather of water. But it appears to be the place of the sea, because that which is salt subsides on account of its gravity, but that which is sweet and potable is elevated on account of its levity, in the same manner as the bodies of animals. For in these, though sweet aliment enters, yet that which is the sediment and excrement of moist aliment is seen to be bitter and salt. For that which is sweet and potable, being attracted by the innate heat, passes to the flesh and to the other parts according to the natural condition of each. As, therefore, in the body of an animal, it is absurd not to think that the belly is the place of potable aliment, because such aliment rapidly disappears, but that it is the place of excrement, because this is seen to remain, and he who is of this opinion does not conceive well. Right, so the belly is the place of potable aliment, um, or food, not just excrement, although the excrement remains there still. The belly is the place of food too. The like also must be said in the present case, for the sea, as we have before observed, is the place of water. Hence, likewise, all rivers run into it, and all generated water. For the flux is into that which is the most hollow, and the sea obtains a place of this kind in the earth. The whole, however, of one part of water is rapidly elevated on account of the sun, but another part is left behind from the above mentioned cause. I wonder how much more. Okay, we're going to have to stop at some arbitrary place in all likelihood. Footnote 4. Aristotle now investigates whether the sea is the wholeness of water, and he shows that it is through 4 arguments, the first of which is as follows. The other elements have wholenesses to which, aspiring, they tend. It is not reasonable, therefore, to suppose that water alone has not a wholeness. But if water has a wholeness, we must investigate what it is. It is, therefore, by no means rivers, for it is adapted to a wholeness to be continued, but rivers are not continued, for they have not a collected body of water. Hence rivers are not the wholeness of water, but the sea as being continued and having water collected together and not separated. And here we may observe that from this dogma of Aristotle it follows that the sea is continued and not divided, as geographers assert it to be. And if it should be said that seas are not continued, but divided from each other, we reply that it is not absurd that the parts of the sea should be in other places, because all things are in all. Thus, though the wholeness of fire is in the inflammable matter at the summit of the air, yet there are fountains of fire under the earth, because all things are in all. Again, it is not possible that rivers can be the wholeness of water, since they are fluent. But the sea is stable, and stability is adapted to a wholeness. The sea, therefore, on account of its stability, is the wholeness of all water, and not rivers. If, however, Aristotle has before said that the sea is fluent, yet it is not fluent in the same way as rivers, for they flow elsewhere, viz., into the sea, but the sea flows only into itself. Nor let it be said, Olympiodorus adds, that as the inflammable matter at the summit of the air, which is the wholeness of fire, is moved, there is not stability in a wholeness. So let's not say that. For though this inflammable matter is moved, yet it is moved with a circular motion, since perpetuity belongs to wholenesses, and those things perpetually remain, which either stand still or are moved in a circle. And this is the first argument. So, well, the wholeness has stability, but circular motion is pretty much stability, is the argument. All right. The second argument is as follows. The sea is evidently the wholeness of water, since all river water, aspiring after its wholeness, hastens into the sea. For parts love to be conjoined to their wholes. Thus we see that a clod of earth, aspiring after the earth, viz., after its proper wholeness, again returns to it. The third argument is this: the place which is the subject of water is the recipient of all water, both salt and potable, but the peculiarity of a wholeness is to receive the whole of water. If, however, it should be said, why does not the sea contain potable water? We reply that so far as pertains to the sea, it contains potable water, but that in consequence of the daily evaporation arising from the sun and moon and the other stars, it does not. The fourth and last argument is as follows. The characteristic of water, as water, is to hasten into the most hollow place of the earth, and that this is the sea is evident, for all rivers hasten into it, though through these four arguments Aristotle infers that the sea is the wholeness of water. Olympiodorus afterwards adduces certain doubts against this doctrine, and also solutions of the doubts as follows. Since all wholenesses are according to nature, but the sea is contrary to nature, for it is salt, the sea, therefore, is not the wholeness of water. To this, it must be replied that the sea is not salt, contrary to nature, for if it were the case, it would be sweet, according to nature. Water, however, which subsists according to nature, is void of quality. Hence, sweetness and saltness are not according to nature in water, for it is natural to water to be cold and moist, which are tangible and not gustable qualities. Another doubt is the following. Seawater, so saltiness is not contrary to the nature of water. Water doesn't by nature have a taste. Seawater is contrary to nature, since to refrigerate and to moisten is the property of all water, but the sea does not produce these effects, for it heats and dries, and therefore is not the wholeness of water. To this doubt we reply that the sea does not heat and dry of itself, but from a fuliginous exhalation being conjoined with it, since so far as pertains to itself it contains potable water, but potable water refrigerates and moistens. And that the sea, so far as pertains to itself, contains potable water is evident, for if any one digs trenches about the shore, he will find them filled with potable water, from which it is evident that the water in passing from the sea, being percolated in the trenches, is freed from the fuliginous exhalation which is mingled with it, since it is only superficially, and not profoundly, united with it. Afterwards, Aristotle converts himself to the third problem, in which he investigates the cause of the saltness of the sea. And he admits, indeed, the reason assigned for it by the ancient philosophers, not as simply the cause of the saltness of the sea, but as a concause of the things asserted by them. For they say that the sea is salt because the most attenuated part of it is daily evaporated from it by the sun, with which part the sun is nourished, and that the feculent and salt part is left behind. Aristotle admits, therefore, that evaporation is the cause of the saltness of the sea, except that this is not the only cause, but a fuliginous exhalation as well causes the saltness. Well, okay. Aristotle, but to inquire according to an ancient doubt, why so great a quantity of water is never apparent, I have a feeling we will have to stop right there. Yeah, okay. So he's raising some doubts. His doctrine is that the sea is the wholeness of water, and it's not by nature salty. Water by nature is cooling and wetting, cold and wet. So the sea is that by nature. There are other reasons why in certain cases it doesn't do that. So I think we're pretty much tracking. This is, it's nice to get into the perspective, the world of Aristotle. Um, it'll be relevant for all other ancient thinkers who took Aristotle's physiology very seriously. So, thanks